Welcome to the Symphony Podcast. Matthew Callens and I on the call today to talk about a topic, lateral thinking. And this is a super exciting one just because it's so foundational to everything that you do, I know, Matthew, and to a lot of the value that I've been able to apply to my own life. And I love the idea of thinking laterally and thinking outside the box. So start us off and we'll talk about this one. We'll keep it tight though.
Yeah, no, I love this topic, and I think it relates in a lot of ways to the conversation we just had a couple weeks ago with Joel Space Mandela about creativity. Just because I think a huge part of creativity comes from the human ability to think laterally and draw from a wide ranging group of experiences and kind of like form solutions that way. But I also think lateral thinking is what's allowed me to progress in my own life. Personally, emotionally, spiritually, but also in my career path. And I think it ultimately comes down to the concept of being able to take inspiration from everything, anything and everything, essentially. Just because this concept of lateral thinking is basically the opposite of finding yourself in one field of work or of life and kind of like looking at the solution bank of what's happened in that field before, or like how things typically go in that arena of life or work, and kind of doing things in those parameters. Whereas lateral thinking is drawing solutions from all across the board, all of your different life experiences, your walks in nature, the conversation you have with a random friend, and integrating it into whatever your life path or your career path is. And so it's a very small shift, and it ultimately comes back to mindset, I believe, which is something that we talk about heavily on this podcast. Um, but yeah, I think the ability to think laterally in all departments of life will ultimately open up your world and make your life a lot better and more interesting, in my opinion.
Jarvis mentions that inspiration comes from the periphery, and a lot of what he talks about and a lot of the questions that he gets on his show are around like how to find your voice, how to be unique. It can be overwhelming coming into this world of being an entrepreneur, being a creator, whatever path you want to go on. And you're looking to your left and to your right, and you're seeing people that are way further along, that are top of the world, and you're seeing them on your phone every single day. So it's like, how can you possibly compete? It's so saturated. Why even go for it? And where this connects into lateral thinking is it's like, how do you actually be unique? Well, you pursue curiosity, you'd connect to things, which is ultimately what creativity is. You're maybe a photographer and you see how I was talking about how tennis is played or something, and you incorporate a technique or a product or something that you see from a different area to your craft. And now you might be far more unique and also driven to create and just feeling like you're creating something that's different, which is, I think, a big hiccup that I know I've come across. It's like, why even create if it's the same or not as good as something else that someone else is doing? So, all that just to say that I concur with the idea that inspiration comes from outside different types of thinking. How has that actually impacted you, like
Absolutely.
logic, like actually practically building businesses? How have you thought laterally and made moves to benefit yourself that way or to your business?
I think it comes back to just paying attention, just to everything, and not, so like as an entrepreneur, we have our businesses, but if I was going around in my day to day life and like trying to think about everything in terms of how it relates back to my business, I don't think that I would find much inspiration. But instead, it's like I will take a walk in nature, right? And I'll notice something um, about how the river's moving, or how the bend of a tree caught my eye, and why did it catch my eye? And then maybe but it just weighs on my subconscious, right? And so then when I'm going back to a problem in the business world, maybe it's like logo creation, and then I noticed how my eye was drawn to a certain thing because of a certain shape that I saw in nature, and then I integrate that into an aesthetic logo for one of our brands. So like that's kind of an example off the top. Like I don't, and it's actually a little bit more historically involved. Just I have one tangible example here. It's of the golden ratio. which is something that was originally discovered in nature. Just kind of how it's like a mathematical sequence, but of how things kind of like move in nature and how it draws your eye into a certain point. Like if you're looking in like a rectangular box, and this is not a very good description of what it actually is, but essentially it's something that happens naturally in nature. And it was studied and observed by someone who ultimately brought it into like the digital marketing world. And now almost like a large percentage of logos and ads that are created follow this same ratio that naturally occurs in nature. And so like that is kind of an example of how you can take something from your walk in the woods and integrate it into like a business issue that you're facing. But I mean, I think just in general, having this concept at the center of your philosophy will just help you. You'll think like that even if you just have the awareness of this concept, right? Because if you understand the fact that you can take inspiration from anything and everything that you see on a day-to-day basis, you will do that. And so I think another good example of this type of thing is I'll have a problem for one of my companies working around in my head, and then on a random Wednesday I'll think to reach out, or a friend that I haven't heard from will reach out to me and be like, hey, let's jump on a phone call and we'll catch up, we'll talk about nothing that has anything to do with the businesses or the companies, but I'll somehow come out of that phone call and be thinking of that issue in a completely reframed way, only because of this conversation that I had with a good friend, who has nothing to do with the businesses that I'm in. And so it's like that concept in general is revolutionary in a lot of ways, because you realize that you can take inspiration from things that are seemingly unrelated and plug them in to your life in a way that's going to create innovative solutions for yourself. Um, so yeah, those are relatively tangible examples, but I think it's just kind of the lens that I try to see the world through, and it just ultimately makes me pay more attention to my surroundings and my encounters, and just kind of everything, honestly.
A big part of being able to think laterally, in my experience, has been not judging your first ideas, not thinking, oh, this is the winner or this is not worth pursuing. That's why brainstorming sessions and, like you say, just taking a walk and creating the space for yourself to actually think about a problem rather than be like, pen to paper, I need to solve this right now, and just forcing yourself to think about it, and limiting the ability to think laterally. And one, I guess I kind of want to lean into the conversation around how do we actually foster that creativity and that ability to think laterally. One of those things is the not judging yourself early on thing. And then the other is actually like creating structured ways, whether it's a walk or talking in a working session with your partner, like we do sometimes, like, just chatting and not necessarily feeling like we have a time limit or that we're talking about a specific thing, but just thinking, oh, this is something I've seen that's worked or not. And um, I took a class in college called Innovation and Design, and it was a full semester, and it felt like it went so slow because we were given a simple problem to solve, which was game day parking on campus, where you have 130,000 people on campus and a very limited amount of parking spots. Everybody wants to tailgate, and we had 6 groups in the class, and everybody basically had the full semester to do this super deep ethnography research project and then come up with a solution at the very end. And the biggest challenge was in this class was to not jump to the conclusion and the solution without doing each and every step that's going to foster that creativity. And so my professor essentially gave us these homework assignments or like group things where it would be like, okay, map the user journey, go talk to people about their game day parking experience, and put it on a graph with a line in the middle that's 0, and then above, the positive experiences and the lower experiences, and literally graph the experience of coming to park on campus. And many different things, like just using sticky notes on the walls. I actually don't remember all the different things that we did to actually, it was a full semester, but I can only remember one thing. There you go. But the takeaway that I had was, as we started to talk to more people, we realized the number one reason people need to drive their cars to campus is simply because they have ice and beer and food in their car and they want to tailgate. So instead of more parking spots or more parking attendants or squeezing more cars in, we came up with a solution to basically create pre-set up tailgates, like a business where someone would pay a flat rate, show up, maybe bring the stuff that's, their alcohol or whatever, but we have the meats and the food and the grill and the tables and everything set up, so you don't even need to drive your car in the first place. And we actually looked online. There's some companies that were already doing this in Oregon and other places, but it was a powerful course for me to take because it showed me real tangible ways, not that I can remember them now, but at least I know that when I am confronted with a situation like this, especially professionally, just not judging, taking your time to come up with that solution is super important. So that's my one take.
Yeah, no, that's a good one, and I think it kind of makes sense to transition from there into what I wanted to talk about next, which is just the concept that I think that there are efficient, innovative solutions that are out there that exist for industries who haven't found them yet because the industries are so specialized. And so, and the thing that makes me think of this is I watched a film recently where it was a guy who was talking about all of the different stuff that he had done in his life. And he used to work in film, but he like created these something to do. It was like some type of machine that helped capture like CGI video quality or something. But that same technology ended up being used in the medical field as like a heart monitoring device or something like that, just
Mm,
because of how the technology transferred over. Like it served a similar purpose, but just because it was in the film industry, it was being looked at from that specialized point of view. And then this guy ultimately got connected with some other guy from the medical world who came from that background, heard about this guy's technology that he was using in the film world, and then was able to make the connection of like, oh wow, that would actually work a lot more efficiently for the way that we're collecting data for like this heart monitoring machine that we're doing or whatever it was. But just that concept in general led me to think that there are probably so many industries out there that are like that, where they're drawing from the same bank of information continually as they're looking for solutions to new problems. And so I think that should encourage people to become curious and try to educate yourself in a wide ranging group of topics, because maybe that becomes you. Maybe you find something that's a solution for a major issue in one industry because you had taken the time to educate yourself in a handful of industries. Um, so I don't know. I think that really spoke to me when I heard that, and I think there's probably countless examples of
yeah.
that type of stuff going on. And I mean, even further back in history, you look at like Leonardo da Vinci, maybe one of the greatest artists of all time, and the main thing that they say about him is that he was curious about everything. Like he studied science, he studied biology, anatomy, humanities. Like he studied, I mean, art, but ultimately his art was the result of him studying all of these different things, and then figuring out technology for him to be able to paint on top of like huge buildings, and then they would use that technology to to like do other stuff. And so he was driving innovation just by his own curiosity, and he was making things like he was making what he wanted to make based off of kind of like where his curiosity led him. And because of that, he ended up kind of being this portal for other people to kind of look at what he was doing and then draw conclusions about their own issues that they were facing in their own industries, just because of his own curiosity. And so I think that's a cool way to look at it too, is just like the more you can learn about, the more you can know about, the more effective you can be, to yourself, but also to others potentially.
It's a great reminder too, just to keep learning, and it is important to just learn about what you're curious about, even if you don't necessarily see that it's going to contribute directly to your paycheck or your career or your relationships. Yeah, that's an
Yeah,
awesome
you don't
reminder.
even you don't even need to know how it's going to tie in yet, but just being
Hmm.
curious is going to lead you down some pathway. And I'm reading this book right now called Range, and it's kind of encouraging that concept of just learning about a bunch of different stuff and kind of having like a surveying period of your life where you're just becoming aware of all of these different disciplines and all these different things that you can get involved with. And one of the chapters is it goes very deep into comparing AI technology to human performance, and kind of where each one of those things stands out and where each one of those things is limiting. And the main strength for humans is that they have the ability to integrate broadly. And so they're talking about how, like with chess, for example, because that's been one of the main things that they've tested AI on in the past. It's like with chess, we don't stand a chance against computers because there's a data set that can be drawn from and analyzed in seconds. That once it's inputted into this AI technology, like it's just we don't stand a chance, right? Because it's a very narrow, I mean, not narrow. There's like a lot of things that can happen, but it's like essentially you can just input it into the technology and it will be able to beat a human. Whereas when the conversation gets more open ended and when it's more, big life issues and real world problems, like that's when we as humans have the strength to integrate from a broad sense of experience and knowledge and find innovative solutions that in that context, AI is very far behind where the human brain is. And so, I mean, I know that it's easy to be like, oh, AI is the future. Like there's not going to be a need for humans anymore, but that's just so not the case. I mean, I think that there's, like we talked about it before, like leadership positions and understanding EQ and interactions and big world issues with lots of things that you need to think about and emotions and all of that type of stuff. Like that's a strength of ours. And so I think we should act like it. We should get excited about that fact and become curious about all types of different stuff and see what types of connections we can draw from those things we become curious about. And that's ultimately what lateral thinking is.
My dad sent me this article a while ago, the 10 vital skills you will need for the future of work. And at the top of that list is creativity, and just talking about how exactly what you're saying. Robots currently can't compete with humans on creativity. They can beat us in chess. They can, pack a box or create something very limited, but they can't really think outside the box. And as more jobs kind of become taken by AI, it's like the ones that you're going to want are required. The skills that are going to be required are those creative, lateral, analytical thinking, emotional intelligence. Um, and it brings me to a recent podcast I listened to with Jim Quick. Jim Quick is he's like a brain expert and a speaker, and he talks about how if knowledge is power, then learning is our superpower. So learning how to learn and how to foster that ability to think and realize like your intelligence can be developed, your skills can improve, nothing is stagnant, is going to be super crucial for the future and just of today already. Those
I
the
love
people that
that.
you want to work with are the ones that are thinking outside the box, that are bringing cool ideas and willing to entertain your crazy ideas. So
Definitely. In that same Jim Quick is OG, by the way, yeah. But also in that same range book that I was reading, they were I don't remember what the exact study was, but they were looking at scientists and from kind of like a historical perspective of who's kind of been at the top of the fields in these different quote unquote specialized categories. But the top performers from these scientists were actually more likely to have artistic hobbies outside of their practice, whether it was like surgeons or just different types of research scientists or whatever it was. The ones who were actually making waves in the industry also considered themselves musicians or artists, or they had these other outlets where they were kind of drawing inspiration from art and then ultimately integrating their experience into their work. And that's what was ultimately driving innovative solutions. So it's like that's about as specialized as a category as it gets, and there's still evidence pointing to the fact that you should integrate broadly and be curious and have hobbies and add a lot to your playing field. Kind of take
got
inspiration from
one
everything.
Yeah, I got one more example that just came to mind earlier in the conversation, but it's a story Seth Godin tells where he showed up to this new job. It was in an office building where when you walk in at the reception stand, you need to take either your pen or something, or you take your. They had a little circular thing that everybody, when they come in, they need to write the time on or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but each day everybody walks in, it takes them like 15, 20 seconds to look through all of the different pens or the different sticks that to find their stick. And on his first day in this job, he took a little piece of tape and wrote his name on it and then attached it to one of the sticks that was his stick. So every time he walked up, he would just say, "Oh, boom, save that 15 seconds." Like this office, the entire office had been doing it super inefficiently for such a long time. And by the next day, every single stick in the little bowl of sticks had a different color piece of tape or a different post-it note or name, and everybody had adopted that faster way of doing it. So it's just kind of an example of when you do show up and see something with fresh eyes, you have the ability to come up with a more efficient creative solution.
Definitely.
Cool.
I think that's a good
Anyways,
ending point. That wraps it
yeah,
up pretty well.
let's wrap this one up. It's been a blast. It's been a nice one. The symphonyco.com is where we're posting stuff, as well as Instagram, and we're growing. We're staying consistent with the Monday episodes, and also doing a couple episodes on Thursdays here and there, doing some clubhouse stuff. And yeah, should be good. Give us a little update actually before we go on Shreddables, Shroomy. Maybe drop the code for getting the 10% off on Shreddables too, because I know that's part of the pod
That's
now.
right. Yeah. Yep. Shreddables and Shroomy are doing their thing. For people that don't know, Shreddables is they're both these are two of my companies. Shreddables is a plant-based protein bar. We got 3 different flavors. They're super bomb, super healthy, about as healthy as it gets. And then Shroomy is it's a little mushroom extract gummy that has lion's mane, cordyceps, and reishi. Really good for immunity, a little brain boost. And they taste delicious. It's basically the best way that you can take any type of mushroom extract on the market right now. But anyone who's listening to this episode, if you go to either of the websites, shroomygummies.com or shreddablesnutrition.com, if you use the discount code Symphony at checkout, it'll give you a nice little 10% off.
Ooh,
And yeah, would love for you to try them. So, and we have some new products coming out actually in the next couple of months. So stay tuned for those as well.
exciting! Sounds good. And I'm about to crack open a Shreddables today. My favorite's the peanut butter, personally, but everyone's got their favorite flavor.
My favorite changes on a day-to-day basis. I usually eat multiple of them a day, so love them all.
Yeah. All right, Matthew. Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for listening. And till next time, next Micropod Monday, we're out of here.